Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us all about this webinar on MCAT Retakes. I'm Julia, working for Inspira Advantage. Really happy that you were all able to join us for this webinar. Just to go over what we'll be talking about today, we'll be talking about the MCAT. Should you retake it, and some key factors that you'll need to know before you commit to a retake. Then we'll talk about how to prepare strategically for your retake, how you'll be able to create a personalized study plan that can really tailor to your weaknesses and play to your strengths. And then, of course, we'll touch on what admissions committees actually really think about retakes, how they see them, and how you can use that to your advantage. If you haven't heard of us yet, we're Inspira, and we're an admissions consulting company that's dedicated to helping you get accepted into your dream school. Our experts have helped applicants just like you get into the medical schools of their dreams. We have over 15 years of experience in the game, and students that work with us have a 94% acceptance rate, and they're also 4 times more likely to get accepted into the school of their dreams. So why not work with us? We have multiple sections in our webinar where you can sign up to have a consultation with a career counselor to get your journey started. And speaking of counselors, I'd like to introduce Benji, who is our admissions counselor here at Inspira. I'll let you go ahead and say hello. We only have him today, so have as many questions for him as you'd like. Go ahead, Benji.
Hey, everybody. My name is Benji Popo. I'm a third-year medical student at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Plano, Texas, if anyone's familiar with the area. Went to UT Austin for undergrad, studied biology and neuroscience. Took a little bit of time to work before medical school as an EMT, and now I'm here living the dream.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Benji. Before we get started with the webinar, just a couple of housekeeping things. Since we only have our one guest today, we only have Benji here. If you do have a question, just want to point out that there's going to be a designated Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So type your questions in the chat box if you do have one, and Benji will answer all of them at that designated time. I also want to flag that this webinar is going to be recorded. So if you missed something or just want to keep this in review, we will be sending this webinar out to all attendees 24 hours after the webinar ends. So you can stay tuned and wait for that in your email mailbox. Okay, let's go ahead and begin.
All right. Hi, everybody live and everybody watching the recording later. Just like we introduced, we're talking about MCAT retakes. But I'm going to try to talk a little bit broadly also about the MCAT in case you're tuning in. If you haven't taken it yet, but you just are thinking ahead, want to have a plan A, B, C, D, that's awesome. So the question, should you retake the MCAT? Again, whether or not you've taken it yet, if you've already taken it once, twice, 3 times, things to consider is going to be your score. Let's say that you've taken it once, you're not entirely satisfied. Figure out what your target score is. Before you had taken it the first time, hopefully you had either a target score or a target range, and think about how far you are. There's some good research showing that the scores at or below 500 tend to have the greatest increases. So if you're already sitting at 510 plus and your target is only a point or 2 away, the research pans out that that small gap, especially when you're on the higher end, usually doesn't work out. However, if you're a little bit lower, if you're kind of right in the middle around 500 or below, and your target is 510 or above, that's actually a very attainable gap. So that's something certainly to consider. The other thing to think about is not only your personal goal, but the target goals of the schools to which you're applying. Whether you make that decision before or after you take the MCAT, before or after you have your score, either is okay. But take some time to actually research into the stats of the average MCAT, the median MCAT for each of those schools to which you're applying. And as always, you should have your reach school, your kind of easier school or your fallback school, as well as your middle ground school that you would like to get into. Next slide. And, consider the costs that go into taking the MCAT. It's not just the overt cost of paying for the exam. That can certainly be a burden for many people, though. If that's the case for you, please check out some fee assistance programs that are available. They're pretty easy to find if you just look up MCAT fee assistance programs if you need to. But also think about the hidden costs, right? The time that you're going to spend studying. Is that time that you would have been taking an additional class in undergrad to boost your GPA? Is that time you might have been shadowing or working in a clinical setting, getting those clinical hours to boost your resume and your CV? Really consider the pros and cons of retaking that MCAT, especially if you're at a score that's more or less satisfactory and you're just aiming for a small increase. Nonetheless, if you have a big gap that you're hoping to achieve, the benefit may outweigh the cost at that point. So consider all the timeline that's going to go into retaking the MCAT if that's what you're thinking about. And before you make a decision, try to think about what happened that got you a score that you were not satisfied with. Was it some one-off big life event? Was it the passing of a relative, or you had to take on an extra job to pay for your kid, your brother, your sister, etc.? If that's the case, and you know that there's going to be a given time in the future where you'll be more free, where life will be a little bit more steady at that time, then maybe that's a perfect reason to retake it. If you realize that you weren't putting in the appropriate amount of time and you've come to the conclusion and you're ready to kind of recharge or reset the way that you want to focus on the exam, that's another great reason too. But if you're going through and there's really no reason why you didn't do as well as you were hoping and your score is already higher, that may mean that that's around where you'd be sitting right now, and that's okay too. Either way, if you're going to retake it, if you've already made that decision, really think about what you're going to do differently, right? That's that old school Einstein definition of insanity, to do the same thing over and over and expect the same result. You have to do something different. Maybe it's resetting your sleep schedule. Maybe you go to bed a bit earlier, wake up earlier, or maybe you're a night owl. Maybe your studying is best late at night. Whatever it is, you have to change something to get a different result. I mentioned this at the beginning, but there's actually some good data that you can look up online to find how much on average scores will improve with a given first test scores. So those who retake it usually do see some score increased, though it's not always tremendous. It's not going to be 20 points, 25 points always. Again, the way that the data bears out is kind of a negative regression, where if you scored on the lower end to start with, you tend to have a higher point increase. And if you're already scoring in the higher end, the point increase tends to be a bit smaller. So really consider where you fall, what your goals are, what your school's goals are, and what you can do to change it. What was the reason you weren't satisfied with the score the first time? Maybe it wasn't the right test date. Maybe you chose to take it during spring break and you really only had that 1 or 2 weeks to study, and you need to take it during a summer or a winter break when you can really dedicate a month or more. That would be a good reason if that timeline fits for you. If it starts to creep into needing to take a gap year, and for whatever reason that's not doable for you, whether financially or just life preference, really take that into consideration. When will be the next time you can select a good test date? This is something to look ahead on and really think not just a few weeks ahead, not just a few months ahead, but even a semester or two ahead. So some of these common mistakes that we've already covered is trying to hit this nail with the same hammer and with the same approach. You've got to figure out what you did differently. Even if you're doing the same approach that worked for all your college tests, all your high school tests, maybe this is the first time you're encountering an exam that's different. Maybe this is the biggest exam you've taken. And for a lot of people, it is. For me, for example, this was the first time I really had to change from passive study habits, just rereading, highlighting, to very active study habits. I recognized early on in my first couple weeks of studying that I wasn't going to be able to just read all this text. It was too much. I had to do active recall. I had to accept, here's what I know, and I'm not going to spend as much time on, even if that's comfortable material. Here's what I don't know. This is the stuff that's not fun. This is the stuff that's difficult, the equations I keep forgetting, and these are the ones I need to practice. I really had to adjust it early on to get the score that I wanted. Also, if you got your score back, don't freak out if it's not what you want. You have to go through all the aforementioned steps before scheduling that date. You don't want to schedule for something just a month out. One, it's not enough time to recharge your batteries, and you need to recharge. This is a big, long process, and you shouldn't just jump into the retake. Two, you need the time to figure out your strategies that you're going to take. Do you need a mentor? Do you need a tutor? Do you need a study group? All these things are worth considering before you jump into taking a retake. Additionally, figure out if you're in a good psychological place. These things happen. There's some amount of people where it's going to be the MCAT. It's going to be the medical school admissions. It's going to be residency. It might be getting a job as an attending, but you're going to hit your first big hurdle. That's going to happen to everyone at some point in their careers going into medicine. Figure out, is this a time where you can take that psychological toll? Because it is a real one. And it's okay if you need to take more than a few months, take your regular college classes and then get back into it. maybe this was a sign that a gap year is a good idea. And there's most matriculants now actually are taking a gap year. So there's zero shame. There's zero problem with it. Medical schools don't look down on gap years at all, so long as you're doing something productive. And if that's retaking to get a better score, great. So don't rush into this. And again, really consider strategically what score you're hoping for, what score the schools you want to go into are hoping for, and decide how much that score can increase and how much it's going to increase your chances of getting into the medical school you desire. I kind of mentioned this in regards to my study strategies, but I think that an important thing is to figure out what is high yield. High yield is a term you're going to hear for a long time throughout your careers. You're first going to hear a lot of it in medical school, then when you're a resident, and even when you're an attending physician. What high yield means is the material that's going to come up a lot. Once you are practicing medicine, this might be your common viruses or your common antibiotics. These are high yield. It's important to know the rare diseases and the new fancy antibiotics as well, but it's not as high yield for your day-to-day practice. In the same way, taking a few steps back all the way to pre-med, where a lot of y'all are right now, you've got to figure out what is high yield. A lot of that information is actually available online through the AAMC, and you can see what percentage breakdown tends to be represented on the MCAT by different sections within each section in regards to physics, chemistry, biology, etc. Spend the time relatively, right? Spend your time proportionally, especially if there's a topic that you could answer with your eyes closed. If someone woke you up from sleep and you still have it, that's not a subject you need to spend an hour every day on. On the other hand, if there are equations where every single time you get that physics question you can't remember, that's going to be high yield for you. If as you're taking practice questions or practice tests, you notice a subject or a particular type of question that keeps coming up, those are the ones to practice, not the one-off ones that only come up once every other practice exam. So these diagnostic tests that are available, there's a few free ones online. Many programs offer free diagnostic tests as well, whether you're going for Princeton Review or Blueprint, UWorld, any number of these, to give you a gauge on areas that you're struggling in now. And it's okay if you're taking this for the first time and there's an area where you really don't do well, that's okay. You have time. If you're retaking and there's an area you're struggling on, that's probably where you lost some of your points on your first exam. And that's what you need to prioritize. So active studying methods are going to be the name of the game moving forward for everybody. Gone are the days where you could just look back over your notes. You can't just underline and highlight the same thing over and over. You have to go through active spaced repetition. What that means is flashcards, for example. There's softwares like Anki that will do strategically spaced repetition, where certain cards will come up that you're missing more, and the ones that you are getting every single time will have longer and longer delays between when you see them. Questions, building your own question decks, finding areas that you struggle in, and trying to create practice sets with your peers, with study groups, those are going to be the way moving forward. Once you're getting closer to test day, if you didn't do this the first time, I highly encourage everyone retaking, you have to simulate test day environments. You've got to say, mom, dad, or roommate, whoever you live with, or if you're by yourself, I really can't be bothered today. I need this 7-8 hours to pretend that I'm in the test. This means no talking to others, no texting, put your phone away somewhere in a cubby, somewhere in the bathroom, just like the test day, right? Take breaks as you plan to on test day. Allot time to go to the restroom, to have your lunch. You have to make it as close as possible. And maybe in doing so, you'll even see places where you're struggling. Were you taking too long in a particular test? Were you taking too long on certain breaks? Did you not take enough breaks? These are all going to be key to success in both your first take and your retake.
Okay, just want to use this as an opportunity to just take a little breather. I know we just had a lot of information to really take in. So with that said, I want to use this as an opportunity to do a little check-in and remind you all that just for joining us, you are eligible for 10% off your entire program with Inspira using the code 10OFFWEB, as well as if you scan that QR code right there, you'll be able to get started on your free consultation and as well as your program. So make sure you take note of that as well. It'll also be in the recording as well that you get, that will be emailed to you, but just to let you know. Okay, back to our regular scheduled programming.
Awesome. Guys, definitely make use of it. Programs like these are super helpful. So please make use of that if you get a chance. And a really important subject that I spent deliberate time thinking about when I was taking the MCAT, and I spent a lot of time telling my friends, telling peers, telling the students I advise, is burnout. Once again, this is a long process. This is maybe the first marathon style exam that any of y'all have studied for. You know, this isn't the SAT, this isn't the ACT. Really, I think of this as the culmination of your undergrad pre-med classes. This is as if you had a final, not just for Bio 1 or Chem 1, but this is Bio 1, 2, Chem 1, 2, OChem 1, 2, physics, all of it in one big exam. And we have to figure out ways to avoid burnout. What burnout can look like is not just, oh, I'm bored of studying, I'm tired of taking the test, but I don't even know if I want to do medicine. I'm tired of everything. I'm tired of college. It's a real deal. And you have to find ways to prevent this, not just now. You're going to have to find ways to prevent this in medical school. You're going to have to figure out ways as a resident when you're dealing with patients to avoid this, and as an attending as well. So my recommendations are figuring out the proper schedule for you in regard to not just rest days, but active rest hours. And what I mean by that is on your study days, you want to get a good schedule where you can study for a few hours at a time, but also figure out ways to relax that are productive also. For me, that was exercise. I would like to wake up, do some exercise, start my studying, get a good meal in, and then do a little bit more light exercise at the end of the day. I personally think that some amount of aerobic exercise, sunlight, is vital for everyone. And there's this paradoxical feeling where you think, oh, I don't have time to exercise. I need this extra hour. But I promise you, if you take that hour to take a walk, ride a bike, go out in the sun, do some push-ups, do some pull-ups, whatever it is that you're capable of at this time, the next 30 minutes, the next hour, the next day will be so much more productive, and it'll be worth way more than that 1 hour you spend exercising. Figure out a day as well. That was looking into just figure out a schedule of a day in the week that you need to rest. Maybe that means that you only do a half day. Maybe that means that it's your Saturday where you take a full-length exam, Sunday you review it in the morning, and Sunday afternoon you rest. That's really important. At the same time, with your study strategies, there's this idea of stacking, right? There's this idea that you can stack different modalities so that you don't burn out in any given one. What that looked like for me is at the beginning of my study period, when I was mainly doing content review, I had 60-70% going through different textbooks. So I would go through my Chem Phys section for a bit, my cars, biology, etc. And I would alternate every 30 to 45 minutes just so I never got bored of any one subject. Then I would spend a good amount of the day alternating between spaced repetition with flashcards, practice questions, and reviewing the questions that I wasn't doing well on. That way, I wasn't just reading a textbook for 10 hours a day. That would be boring. I wasn't just doing questions for 10 hours a day. Your eyes would glaze over. Finding a way to stack the modalities by which you study is really going to be a good strategy to avoid mental fatigue. Now, from the admissions committee standpoint, there's a lot of questions and a lot of confusion as to exactly what it looks like. Most schools do have the capacity to see all of your scores. What differs between schools is whether they consider all those scores or they only consider the highest one. That's an individualized difference between the school, and it can vary year by year based on the admissions committee. Nonetheless, things that all of them will consider is the trend that your score moves. Is it steady? Is it moving upwards? Is there a big leap? Is it moving downwards? All these things are going to be really important. If your retakes show you about the same and then one drops, then one is back to the same, it may be a sign that it's not worth doing these retakes. If, however, you have one, let's say at a 505, the next one's a 512, the next one's a 519, that is awesome. And, depending on the school, I think that would either mean that they look at that 519 and it's the same as someone who never retook and got a 520, or a 519, or they're going to say, that's awesome. Look at this person who's persistent, who's determined, they're consistent, they're improving over time, they're changing study strategies. That can be a real advantage to you. But you have to figure out if that's your position. If you're already at a 522, a 523, exceptional scores that are over the 98th, 99th percentile, it might be risky to retake. If you choose to retake and you use different study strategies that don't work as well, and you drop down to a 518, 519, that may not look as good as just sticking with your higher score. So consider that. And just like we talked about in regards to the hidden cost, are you taking this retake at the cost of better extracurriculars, at the cost of more shadowing, at the cost of clinical hours? Consider how much that point difference is strengthening your profile versus what else you could be doing in that time. So again, just to summarize this slide, admissions committees typically can see all your scores. Schools vary individually by whether they consider just the highest score or all of them. Nonetheless, for all schools, the key is going to be able to show a trend and a pattern that you are someone who considers what happened, changes your strategies, and is always moving upward. This is going to be really critical for those of you thinking about taking a retake, whether it's the second or third time or more. Now, if you have already applied with your retakes and you're thinking about how this is going to come up in your secondary essays, in your interviews, in the questions that they may come up on multiple medical interviews, when you are asked about this, the key here, and the key in any interview, is don't spend so much time on what went wrong the first time. You don't need to justify all the things that happened, but rather spend time talking about the study strategies you implemented to improve. Talk about how that challenge, how that hurdle altered the way you look at failure, maybe how it shaped the way you think about test taking and made you someone who's growing, right? You want to highlight that you had this struggle. You don't need to persevere on it. You don't need to pontificate, or you don't need to spend too much time on the struggle, but just mention that you had a tough time the first time, you had these changes that you made, and you took steps to improve. Again, you don't need to justify the low score. You do need to justify the steps you took to improve. And that can be a really powerful message that you send. And if you've taken it not just once, but 2-3 times, you may consider the story of how you changed over those times, what you learned about yourself, and what you learned about test taking. Once again, if this comes up in your interviews, you want to highlight the upward trend. You want to know when it's time to move forward. If you're happy with your score, if you're happy with the schools that you're applying to, focus on strengthening those other aspects of your application. A good story might be that you took the exam twice, the second time you improved, and then you thought, should I take it a third time? No, you decided instead to shadow, to do some research, to build your extracurriculars. So you show growth not just in one area, but all areas of your academic profile. So last things to think about are, to summarize, weigh the hidden costs. Consider how much the extra points will benefit you versus the things you could be doing at that time instead. Consider your goals and the goals of the schools to which you're applying. Is your score just a point or two behind your reach schools? Is it at or ahead of your middle ground schools? Is it way above your backup schools? If that's the case, really take some time, maybe meet with a counselor or a trusted friend to consider whether or not it's worth it. If, on the other hand, your scores are well below even your reach schools, that might be a good sign that it's worth taking the time to take a break, take a breather, figure out what went wrong, and retake that exam. And if you're going to retake that exam, figure out how it fits, not just in the weeks ahead, but in the months, the semesters ahead. Does this mean that you need a plan for a gap year? If that's the case, can we make a plan for your gap year? Maybe that's another job. Maybe you just focus on the exam for a few months. All these things are okay. These are okay places to be as long as you're willing to make a plan and willing to be strategic about it. And there's ways to do that alone. That's fine. There's ways to do it with friends, with family. But there's also great ways to do it with counselors, with mentors, whether it's at school, Inspira, trusted friends, advisors. You have a big team here that's happy to help you. So we also have some webinars that we've done about strategies that high scorers will take. You can go back and listen to the recording. Those should be available to you. There's also plenty of resources online about study strategies from high scorers. Think about efficient study strategies that we described earlier in the webinar, including active recall, making questions, quizzing each other, working with groups, rather than just passive recall and passively looking over notes. and really consider the resources you're using. You don't need 5 different versions of the same flashcard deck. You don't need 5 different versions of a QBank. You need one of each. And you need to figure out which one of those each works best for you. That takes some time. It might take a week or two to play around, try some free trials, and see which one you like best, which one fits your study strategy, and choose those different modalities. That way, when it's time to study, you can practice efficient stacking, like I mentioned earlier in this video, using your one flashcard deck, your one QBank, your one material, source of material, and that'll really be your key to success. So finally, to put all this together, take some time to decide if retakes for you. If you've already taken the exam once, look over your score, look over your schools, consider a hidden cost of retaking. If you haven't taken it at all, just think ahead. That's great to have a plan B and decide where in your life that would fit. If you've decided you want to retake it, build a structured plan. See which sections you did wrong. Maybe take another diagnostic test to see the areas that you're still struggling on. And ultimately, remember the big picture. The MCAT's a big part of your application. Just like your GPA, it's going to get you in the door for many schools, but it's not everything. You also have to consider how your overall profile looks. Is this coming at the cost of other aspects of your profile? Is this going to take away time where you can be getting letters of recommendation, working on your personal statement, doing all those important extracurriculars? So just remember, there's many parts to your application. The MCAT's an important one, but it's a whole picture that you need to build of why you are the applicant to get into medical school. And again, you've got a whole team that's ready and eager to help you do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Benji. That was super insightful. We're just about to get to our Q&A section, but before we do that, I just want to take this time as an opportunity to ask for some feedback. If you've attended many webinars before, or if this is your first, and maybe you have some ideas on how we can improve or change things around, or if you just want to shout us out, you really love Benji and his insights, and you want to give him some love, you can do that too. By scanning the QR code that you see there, your feedback really does help us provide better guidance in future sessions. I also want to flag, because I know Benji did bring it up, we do record our past webinars and we post them on our YouTube channel. So I'll post the URL in the chat if you want to go ahead and just review all of the past webinars that we've done, if something maybe comes to mind, or because we've done a couple ones on preparing for the MCAT, so might be a good opportunity to look those over again as well. And we'll just go ahead and get started with the Q&A. So there's the QR code there as well if you want to book a free consultation with Benji to get started on your journey. But we can go ahead and get the Q&A started. So if you have any questions that you've been hanging on to, feel free to type them in the chat, and we will go ahead and answer them for you.
If anyone's on a time crunch, by the way, I dropped my email in the chat. You can use that QR. You can reach out to me directly, and I'll get you connected to the right people. But I'm always happy to answer questions. I try to reply to every email within 24 to 48 hours, so don't hesitate to reach out. I'm also more than happy to take some questions here. Is anyone in Texas also? You can type in the chat or just shout it out. No. Well, hopefully you guys are UT fans nonetheless.
Okay, I've just posted our YouTube channel there. If you want to take a look at past webinars or any of the content that we do have, there's an option for you as well. Benji, maybe like while we're waiting for a question, do you want to just go over like taking, the MCAT, if someone's going into it, literally like they're taking it the next day, what are some like 5 or tips that you have just for like, preparing for the day of taking an MCAT that you've already taken before, if that makes sense?
Sure, great question. In regard to any test, I've always been an advocate that the day before the test should be super light. If you're doing any studying, it should just be like a really, really brief review earlier in the day over any just material that would just make you feel more comfortable. Frankly, in that last 24 hours, you are unlikely to learn any new material that's going to stick in your long-term memory and be ready to apply for test day. And I know it's hard. I remember high school exams, college exams. Even now when I take exams, I'm always tempted to just stay up late and study till the last minute. And I promise the relief that you'll get, especially if you're taking it a second time, of just taking a mental break the day before is really important. Now, that also doesn't mean to sleep in till noon and just completely change your schedule. Take that last day to really get in the mood, to settle in. Try to wake up at the same time that you would for the next day. Just keep the rhythm going. Whatever you're going to plan to eat on test day, you should have been eating for the weeks leading up to. I know that sounds like a random detail, but you really don't want some GI upset. Maybe that's even the reason why you had trouble the first time. I have people I know that was the case. They just got nervous. They had to rush to the bathroom and it threw them off. So whatever you're planning on eating on test day, if you're a coffee drinker, start drinking the same amount of coffee, figuring out your breaks early on. If you like to take snacks, figure out what snacks you want at which different hours. All these things are going to help you be comfortable on test day and relax. And I get it. It's really nerve-wracking if you're taking it the second, third time, and you just want to get that score. And maybe that one thing that's been missing is just the stress. So try to implement healthy strategies. Take some time to walk outside. Watch a movie at some point. Talk with your friends about things outside of medicine. By the time you take the MCAT, whether it's the first time or second or more, your brain's just going to be bustling with random science facts and physics equations. You're not going to lose it in the one day you take to relax before the exam. So I really recommend just relax. If you're a caffeine drinker, if you're planning on doing coffee for the test day, I would recommend nothing after noon on the day before the test, just so you can get good, healthy sleep. Try to avoid a late dinner. Don't, go have a ton of carb loading. It's a marathon of a test, but it's not a marathon of a run. So make sure you don't eat so much that you have trouble sleeping. Try not to do any exercise too late at night. These are all just general, good, healthy sleep hygiene habits, but are going to be really critical for test day. On the test day itself, if you can have someone drive you, if you're staying with your folks or if you've got a roommate, I had my stepdad drive me, and I thought that was a nice little pressure reliever. I didn't have to worry about traffic or if something happened to the car. I knew that he just dropped me off and then he picked me up at the end of it. And that was nice to know, not deal with parking or anything. So that's another small thing you could do to relieve some stress on test day. These all might sound like small things, but I think it goes a long way, particularly when you're already feeling a bit anxious or nervous about retaking the exam. That was a really good question. I hadn't considered some of those kind of studying adjacent study strategies in a while.
Well, there you go. We got all the insights from you, so appreciate it. I was just also wondering if you could clarify, when it comes to retaking the MCAT, is there a specific limit of MCAT retakes that you can take, like a hard stop where you have to stop taking it after so many times?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, it's 7. There's also a limit between how many you can take in a given time period. All this information is publicly available, but to the best of my knowledge or the best of my memory, the lifetime limit is 7 exams, and there is some limit within every 2-year period. It might be 3 exams that you can't take, just 4 exams in 1 year, for example. And really, you shouldn't be spacing it that close anyway. I would say, if you take an exam in the winter, for instance, and you're not happy with it, I probably wouldn't take it. I would either take it like late in the spring or maybe beginning of the summer. So you shouldn't be stacking them month back to back. But yes, to succinctly answer your question, it's a 7 lifetime total, at least from when I took the exam. And there's a limit for a given number of years, how many you can take in those years. All of this is public information for AAMC.
Okay, awesome. Any more questions, guys? We've got some time.
In regard to admissions counseling, for anyone watching this later, anyone on the call now, you can also ask if you don't necessarily need MCAT tutoring, but you want some time just to talk about MCAT strategies. I'm available for that. There's other advisors that are available too. So you can reach out, book a consultation just for the MCAT if that's what you want. Not necessarily tutoring if that's not what you need, but happy to spend a whole hour just talking about different strategies, building a calendar with you. I think that can be really helpful, is going through your Google Calendar and setting different dates. We can go day by day. So lots of options to get creative. But you got to take that first step forward.
For sure. I think those are all of the questions that we have so far. So I think it's best if we just wrap it up here. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know we really learned a lot from Benji, so thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and wisdom. If you do want to book a consultation with Benji or any of our consultants, you can go ahead and scan that QR code on the screen right there. If you missed it, just to let you know, we are recording this webinar and it will be sent out to all attendees in 24 hours, so you can expect to see it then. Until next time, happy for you guys to join us at the next webinar, and we'll see you then. Take care.